All right, Max, I want to finish up on this USC front. So the way I see it is Oregon doesn't get knocked down as a tier one recruiter just because USC is elevating to where they should be as a tier one recruiter. I think in a given cycle, because they'll go after a lot of the same players, and we're already seeing it in this class. They're both after Ryder Lyons, who probably winds up at USC. Brandon Arrington is in there. Tom flipped from Oregon to USC. Like there are going to be more of those sorts of battles. I think what you're going to see in the next couple of years, and I want your thoughts on this, is they can both recruit at a top 10 level for a given class in the same cycle. I think because they're going to go after the same high level guys, and Oregon will win some and USC will win some of those battles. I don't know that you could ever see both inside the top 5 nationally. That's where I think the difference comes, is maybe Oregon's class, back-to-back top 5 classes going into this cycle. Like, I think you could see that continue, but then you might have, if in a 5-year span with USC in its old recruiting form, which wasn't as good as it should be, if Oregon were to pull 3 or 4 top 5 classes, now maybe it's 2 or 3. That's the way that I see it.
Yeah, I think I'm on your side as far as both being in the top 10, probably being a little bit more of the likely outcome. And I like what you said about just because USC is recruiting better than it has in the past doesn't mean Oregon's going to recruit poorly, but maybe you just don't see them getting all those guys that they're going head to head on as consistently as they have in previous cycles. Because in previous cycles, you saw Oregon was going up against USC and you were kicking your feet up saying, tell me when this guy commits to Oregon. But that's not the case necessarily anymore. Certainly with a guy like Tom committing to USC, flipping away from Oregon, and then shutting his recruitment down entirely. But we still have months to go until December. So I'm not taking anything away from what USC is doing. I just think that what Oregon has done and continues to do is a bit more sustainable. I think they're more set up for immediate success here in the future. Because we have to remember, Spencer, these 2026 commits aren't playing on the field in 2025 for either team. So I love what Dan Lanning has done with Oregon's roster. I think Lincoln Riley is doing everything he possibly can to turn his situation around at USC, and I think they're going to be a good team this year. I think I'm a little bit unsure of what the quarterback situation looks like. Just how good can Jaden Maeva be? Is that, in fact, going to be their guy? There's still a lot of questions, I think, for both teams. But I remain confident in what Oregon has done and the way that they're building.
Yeah, and I like what Oregon's defense showed in the spring game on Saturday, and I've laid out my takeaways all throughout the week on the show, and those will continue next week as well. But I want your thoughts. Like my biggest takeaways were the defensive line's really good, the competitive depth is great, and the quarterbacks looked awesome. What big picture, before we get to a couple individuals, maybe stood out to you when you watched the spring game on Saturday?
I'd say the young secondary and the young receivers, because those are two positions that have been loaded with talent every year, like each of the past 2-3 years, but we just haven't really seen a whole lot of those guys get on the field, right? You look at receiver, for example, you get Evan Stewart, Tez Johnson, Trayshawn Holden. And I mean, kind of a natural byproduct of that is that the younger guys get pushed a little bit further down the totem pole because the staff, I'm sure they would say it, like maybe not outright, but it's like you're looking at the proven commodity, the safer option, and you don't have to worry about those guys being ready as you maybe would with some of these younger players. And then same thing in the secondary, Jabbar Muhammad, Brandon Johnson, Taisheem Johnson. There's a lot of these guys that have been, Nico Reed, that have been brought in, and naturally we just don't see the younger guys as much because you're not going into the portal most of the time unless that's a guy that's going to help you right away. Not every situation is a Dante Moore, hey, sit for a year and learn behind somebody in front of you. Like, that was incredibly intentional, and now it looks like he is more than likely going to be handed the reins, but we got to see what happens at quarterback. So I think those were some of my broader takeaways. I mean, I've always been super, super interested in the play of Oregon secondary. I think that the receivers have been good, not like phenomenal, and they've done enough to kind of, keep that Oregon offense humming. And it's more of a norm for Oregon to have solid wide receiver play. But I think in terms of Oregon looking to take that next leap as a top tier program, that the secondary has kind of been something that's been holding them back from maybe a little bit of a glass ceiling, you could say. We want to get really, really metaphorical on this pod, but I think that I'm just super excited to see some of those young guys let it rip.
Yeah, I'm with you on the secondary. I think the receiver room has been the best that it has been in Oregon football's history in my lifetime, at least in the last several years. Recruiting, development, production, NFL caliber guys. Like I think that it's been a really, really good stretch, and Ross Douglas has a lot to build upon from what Junior Adams established in the last couple of years. I'm in 100% agreement with you in the secondary. I'm really excited to see what this safety room ends up being in particular. I think Oregon has had a bunch of guys that are fine to below average, and other teams have taken advantage of that. Most notably, Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. You just, everywhere you look, you didn't have the ability for the safeties to make plays. And you just look at what Ohio State had defensively with, was Lathan Ransom a safety? I think he was. Yeah, Lathan Ransom and
that's a dude.
And Caleb Downs. Those are dudes. Those are dudes. Oregon hasn't had a dude at the safety position that I felt like is a real impact player in Dan Lanning's entire tenure. I don't really know why. I think that's why they went out and recruited so heavily and brought in the best DB haul ever in Oregon recruiting history in the 2025 class. But yeah, I like the way they look. I felt like the young guys looked the part. They made some plays. I mean, Offord and McNutt both had pass breakups in the end zone against guys who were far more experienced in college football than them. Those are a couple of 5-star recruits. I thought Aaron Flowers was, coming downhill and making some plays. I thought he was just okay on the coverage side of things. But yeah, I like, iffy. Someone left a comment the other day that in my spring game reactions, there has not been enough iffy propaganda. They might be right because, he forced the fumble, but then, the other way to think about this, which you have to with any defensive back, quarterbacks weren't throwing his way. And it's not for a lack of wide receiver talent and depth. We know that. I've heard a lot of buzz on Iffy all throughout the spring, Max. I think he's going to be a starting corner.
I think he's going to be a stud. I think just what his role is going to be remains to be seen a little bit. I want to also say, let's not forget about Dakota Fields. I think that's a guy that I've heard a lot of really good things about since he got injured and had to essentially miss all of last year. He wasn't medically cleared to play in the spring game, and he is someone that I think has certainly looked the part. He grabbed an interception in last year's spring game and really fits Dan Lanning's prototype at corner. So that's another guy that I'm really excited to see. And then you also have Kingston Lopa probably taking on a bigger role. Dylan Thieneman going to be in the mix heavily. So I'm super excited to see this safety group, the secondary group, really one that is admittedly green and lacking experience, but supremely talented.